Cosplayland, I am Alice and today I will finally show you how I made my historically accurate Nezuko cosplay. And I am using the term historically accurate in a very loose sense. Of course I am probably not using the right materials nor the right techniques, but I did my absolute best to research and create all the patterns to make this kimono, and I will link them in the description if you're interested in making something similar. Wearing a kimono is an art on itself, and I invite you to research the topic as I am just a beginner. I will only be showing you little clips of how I made it, but for now let's start making our kimono. For my project I will be using cotton. Nowadays most kimonos are made of silk, but Nezuko is a commoner in the 19th century and she wouldn't have worn such a delicate fabric to work on the woods. It was more likely to be something like wool, as she lives in a very snowy mountain and it's very cold. Traditionally, the width of the fabric in Japan was much narrower than today, and I tried to reflect that on my pattern. You want to cut equal widths of fabric which you will lately modify to fit you. In Japan, they did not cut off any excess fabric to make a kimono. They simply folded the excess and hid it in the seams, so you will notice most of the lines in this pattern are sewing lines. You do not have to cut them. The shapes are quite simple, but there are however lots of notches to position the several elements on the kimono, so don't forget to mark them for an easier build. As all the lines of the kimono are straight, a ruler will be very helpful for this project. And of course, don't forget to mark all the notches on the other side. The length of a kimono will depend on your actual height. I am not tall, but I included different lengths in the pattern and you can just choose whichever is closest to your size. And once I had all my pieces drawn, it was time to cut the fabric. And as always, you can use weights or cuts to keep your patterns from moving. The sleeve length of a kimono depends on many factors. I included the most common and I gave a short explanation of each one in the instructions. For Nezuko, I will be using one of the short ones called tomesore. The next piece is the overlap panel. As I said, fabric was narrow at the time and they had to attach an extra piece at the front to be able to close the kimono. Just remember to also mark the notch that corresponds to your height. This is again going to be a sewing line, which I will explain later. We are almost done cutting and marking the pieces. This is perhaps the most difficult part. Just wait until your cat is finished grooming and let's move on to the next one. Cut one last rectangle but narrower and you will have your collar. And once again, mark the notches on this piece. You will notice the female version has some round lines and it's a little bit more difficult, but the male one doesn't have them and you will be able to do it all straight. Before I start sewing, let me explain something which I think is important about the size of your kimono. Everybody believes one size fits most, but it is not really true. For a well-fitted kimono, you want to consider two factors: your hip circumference and your yuki, or arm to neck length. I have included instructions on how to do this on the pattern, but if it is a bit too difficult to get around it, just choose one of the two, either your hip circumference or your yuki size, whichever is bigger, and just do it like that. It will work for a simple project. Of course, I don't do simple, so here's how I made mine. I first found my size according to my hip and to my yuki. I drew a line for my yuki at the top of the kimono. I could have just marked it, but I decided to draw it so you can see it better. Then I found the notch that says adjust yuki size here, and here I will be marking my hip size. I drew a diagonal line from the notch to the yuki line at the very top of the kimono. And from the notch down, I will be marking my hip size. And you will be thinking, why don't you just lengthen the sleeves? Isn't that easier? Well, it is all about proportion. For a truly balanced kimono, this is the way it was done. But of course, you are free to do whatever suits you and your project. I will show it to you once again because I'm not sure if you got it. This is my hip and this is my yuki. They are slightly different. Draw one of the lines and mark the other one. Find the notch that says adjust yuki and draw a diagonal from the yuki point to the notch. Easy as that. Mark the rest of the lines on your front panel and we can finally see some action. But before we start sewing, let's address the elephant in the room. Didn't my kimono have black lines? Oh yes, yes it did. And I drew them one by one because I couldn't find the right fabric for it. So yeah, here is a montage. I already made a video on how to print fabric, and no, this is not historically accurate, but it worked. And just for a bit of historical reference, this pattern I'm drawing is called asanoha, and it was often used on children's kimonos with the hope they would grow big and strong. Oh well, we know what's gonna happen here. And now, let's start sewing. The back is just a straight line. At the front, you will notice the front panels don't align with the edge, so I tried my best to align the sewing lines while I pin my fabric. That is, ensuring my pin goes through both lines. Take your time and you will get it. And don't forget to iron each panel as you go. In Japan, they actually fold the edges a few millimeters over the top of the stitching lines, so you can place your thumb underneath while you iron it to get this effect, which I think it kind of reinforces the stitches, and in any case it looks quite cool, but you don't need to do it. And this is how it looks. Undoing the sides next, and this is where you want to be looking at those notches to make sure you are doing it right. If you follow my pattern instructions, you will notice that there is a fold at the front and the back of your kimono called uchiage. This fold was to adjust the length of your kimono while you were growing, and also to reinforce the fabric, and just in case you needed to adjust the button of your kimono if it got a bit worn out. You could always let out this fabric. I did not have enough fabric to make it, so mine will not have it, but it is also correct. I just had to sew the size of my kimono, in my case starting at the female notch, which is lower than the male one. And you will notice the seam allowance is way bigger than your usual one. This is because in Japan they didn't cut the excess fabric when they sew a garment. They just hid the excess in the seams in case you ever needed to make alterations in the future. You can do whatever you want with this excess, but the traditional way was to create a felt seam and hand sew it in place with tiny stitches, which of course I did. And I am going to fold the fabric inwards all around the sides, including the armholes. Notice at the top the hem will be narrower because I adjusted my yuki. At the front panel, I just folded the wide excess fabric to the side. And I started the long process of hand sewing it all by hand. Did I mention it was snowing when I first started this project? It's almost summer now. I used the normal whip stitch to do this, but the correct technique is called unshin, and it is basically a series of tiny run-on stitches that you do by hand. They do this type of stitch because kimonos are meant to be unsewn and sewn again for repairs or to wash them, and I also think they had a lot of free time. Either way, the results are quite similar in both techniques, with only tiny stitches visible at the front. I went ahead and also hemmed the bottom and the sides of my front panels. I am going to carry on with my sleeves next. I will be doing French seams at the bottom of my sleeve. And for the outer corner, I will use my template to draw a round curve and sew this as well. Remember when I said Japanese do not cut the excess fabric? This is true for the curve as well. They would just gather the excess and fold it inwards. And of course they would sew everything by hand again because they had free time and they didn't have sewing machines. You can use a cardboard template to iron your fabric and make it easier for you. At the arm opening, I folded the seam inwards, and as I decided to use the selvage of my fabric, I didn't need to worry about it fraying. This was very common at the time because, as I said, the fabric was much narrower, so they would use everything on it. I hemmed the back as well, and notice that the female sleeve is open all the way. And of course, everything was hand sewn. These are my sleeves, and they are ready to get attached to the kimono. To attach my sleeves, I placed them in the correct side and I turned my kimono inside out so I could align them correctly. Once again, look at the notches and sew this part. The sleeves will definitely come undone unless you reinforce them. Ask me how I know it. You can use a small zigzag stitch at the ends to do it. And remember that female kimonos have an opening at the side called miyatsuguchi, which help to further accommodate their kimonos. Finally, I will be attaching the collar, but first I need to cut a slit on the shoulder seam as I forgot to do it before. Once again, there's notches for everything, just follow them. My collar should have a collar guard, but I ran out of pink fabric, so I used a piece of cotton on the inside instead. Please ignore the back seam at the back, because that was the only way I could make it fit. If you are using the collar guard, which is a bit shorter than the collar piece, just fold the seams inwards and sew it on top. As mine is just to reinforce my fabric, I just had to sew it on the inside. I basted my pieces together to treat them as one. And I pinned my collar to the kimono starting at the center. Notice once again, the sewing lines will not match with the edges. Try your best to align the lines together. Once you are happy, and you may need a couple of attempts, pin the rest of the collar. Sew the collar starting at the back and take your time to make sure it's going well. It is okay if it doesn't work the first time, just try again. You could cut the excess fabric at the front, but in a real kimono they will just fold it inside the collar, and that's what I'm going to do. That's the last part you need to do. Just fold that collar and once again sew everything by hand or not, it's your choice. And with this, my kimono was finished. The next piece I am going to be making is the jacket or haori. Nezuko wears a long haori or nagabaori, which is not so fashionable nowadays but would have been very handy for the cold winters at the time. Notice that most haori are lined, but I will not be lining mine because this is a cosplay and I have already sewn a lot. I am not going to take long to show you how to make this piece, as it is basically the same steps as with your kimono, but with a slightly different color, so I will focus on that instead. Haori had to be wide to accommodate the kimono and the obi at the back, so they will have a gusset sewn to the sides. I have seen modern haoris without this piece, but as I am doing a historical one, I decided to give it a go. Notice that my piece is a rectangle, but I want to sew a triangle, so I align the edges at the bottom and the middle of my rectangle at the top. This will create the triangle. Here is a closer look of the top. And this is how it looks. As I am doing a female haori, my gusset doesn't go all the way up to the top. I am now going to fold all the edges inwards and I'm going to finish all the seams the same way I did for my kimono. I made the front of my haori a little bit longer so it would look straight when I'm wearing it, because the collar will pull back when I put it on my kimono, but this is not necessary. I finished the sleeves the same way as with my kimono and I attached them. And for the collar, I am going to attach it the same way as before, The only difference is that there is no overlap panel on the haori. I want to point out the importance of checking the width of your fabric and checking that all the fabric pieces fit on your fabric, because once again I had to add an extra piece of fabric to my haori because I did not have enough. But the Japanese embrace mistakes, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. Before you completely close the collar, you may consider adding a loop of fabric or ribbon to the sides if you want to add a closure at the front. And with this, the haori was done. Notice that it is worn with the collar folded inwards, kind of like a lapel, but different. Notice I have not shown you how to make the obi. It is basically two long rectangles of fabric sewn together, but how you wear it and how to make all the accessories needed to wear it is a beast on itself. If you would like me to do a tutorial explaining all these, let me know in the comments and I will do my best. But for now, here is the reveal. Hope you enjoyed this project. It took a while, but for me it was totally worth it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, as it helps me grow this channel, and I will be seeing you in the next adventure. Bye! Did you see that?